Hi, I'm Tiffany. Welcome to Towering TBR. So, recently I've started a new series on my channel called F in Pairs. It's where I take a fiction and a nonfiction book that is on the same topic and I discuss and recommend. I have done one episode so far on the opioid crisis, and I will link it here in case you'd like to check it out. Today's topic is the Challenger's explosion in 1986, and I will be reviewing a fiction book and a nonfiction book. For a myriad of reasons, this trip into space was highly publicized because it was going to have a teacher, Krista McAuliffe, on board, which helped renew the public's interest in the space program. So, the fictional book I'm talking about is We Dream of Space, and this is a middle grade focused on three siblings. They first hear about the Challenger program because their teacher wanted to try out for the spot. Her teacher, although she didn't get picked, was very excited, and many children were able to watch the launch on TV as it happened and see the disaster firsthand on that January morning. Out of the three siblings, Bird, she's kind of had these imaginary conversations with Judith Resnick, one of the female mission specialists that was on the space shuttle. She kind of imagined her idol basically encouraging her to go into space and encouraging her to, break through barriers that have never been before. And so when the Challenger explodes and these women and men die, she is especially grief stricken. She's lost her hero, the person she most wanted to emulate. And her grief at these people dying was heartbreaking. I felt for her so much. This was a very interesting perspective to read from school children who watched the launch on TV and then watched it explode. And I really did enjoy that. Some middle grade can really transcend age. It can appeal to children and adults as well. And unfortunately, this one does not. This writing is very simple and plain, and the events are fairly straightforward. And while I enjoyed it, I do think it is better for younger readers. But I'm very glad to have had this perspective, and it definitely added something to my reading experience. And if you have any young people who would be interested in this, I would still recommend it. Luckily, I have so much more to talk about with Challenger. This was a 5-star read. So good. I'm glad I listened to my friend Audrey and picked it up because she told me it was the best nonfiction she had read this year. And wow, yeah, it's definitely going to be on my nonfiction list. So the book starts off going way back in time to the Apollo 11 mission. We get a quote from the first man to go into space, Alan Shepard, and he says he was nervous because every part of the ship was, purchased from the lowest bidder. And yeah, that definitely is kind of scary, knowing that there are so many different pieces that could fail. However, they did find out that the astronauts in the Apollo 11 capsule were not able to open the door from the inside. Additionally, the environment was pure oxygen. They did not mix it with any other gases, and oxygen is highly flammable. And unfortunately, they decided it was too expensive to create a hatch on the inside to let the astronauts get out on their own. And of course, that led to disaster. Something caught fire while they were doing a drill, and all three men were incinerated in the capsule. This was a tragedy, but it also set a precedent. Humans could be sacrificed for the bottom line. So much of the book discusses the accidents and the near misses and everything that was kind of going on at the time. Everything is just too expensive, and people were way too cavalier about safety. With the people's trust waning, their budgets got cut again and again, and that led to even more careless decisions. That section is like the first 50 or 60%. Like, we just see all of these failures, all of these things that could go wrong and did. We see the budget cuts and the bad decisions and the realizations that they had gotten very lucky a couple of times and that they couldn't count on that every time. So basically, having a teacher on the shuttle was basically a PR thing. They did a highly publicized search for a teacher to ride on the space shuttle, and the director of NASA even said, "Kids love space. A teacher could give you an introduction to those kids that no one else could." They picked a teacher basically to increase the public's support, but also to get children interested in the space program as well. They even sold merch. Like, seriously, merch. We don't really get to the main event until over halfway through. We see a lot of the buildup a lot of the setup, how it operated, and how when there were mistakes, they investigated themselves instead of having other regulatory boards um, weigh in. But we get so many near misses. We get so many countdowns and scrubbing of launches. And there's even a point where the rockets were fired up, and at the very last minute, something went wrong, and they had to shut it off and scrub the mission. And we see how frustrating that is, not only for the head of NASA, but also for the astronauts. They're really excited. They're ready for this. And each time they think it's going to happen, and then it doesn't. We find out the scientists were called the bad news guys because they were trying to, hold the company to regulations and high standards. And many were told to just bury their findings. If they found anything that would delay the launch, just bury it, just hide it. Don't don't do your job and make sure these people are safe, because that's a waste of money, basically. There were so many opportunities for these authorities to stop at so many points, but red flag after red flag, they just didn't care. The morning of, there was a lock that was malfunctioning, it didn't clasp, and they were like, "Oh, well, that's probably not important." And it's like there was a bolt that was stuck, and they were like, just shear it off. And there was ice on the shuttle, and they're like, it's probably fine. Just so many opportunities for them to not make this awful mistake, and they just didn't listen. There were people, engineers at NASA and at the rocket company, that were saying, "This is not safe. Don't do this. We need to wait. We need to do more investigation and figure out a way to make this safe." And unfortunately, on that day, he was looking for evidence that it was absolutely not safe rather than evidence that it was safe. He's like, "Well, if you don't have anything to prove it's unsafe, we're going to go ahead anyway," which of course was a very bad decision. All of this helped me kind of understand the pressure he might be feeling. In one time, I think the president or the vice president was going to swing by and watch the launch, and it didn't happen that day. And you just feel the frustration and the anger and the anxiety about being able to do their job. I am so sad that those engineers and scientists were ignored. And knowing that these 7 men and women on the space shuttle died, it was heartbreaking reading this. And to know that their lives were basically sacrificed for the bottom line because they wanted to get this up and going, and they didn't care about keeping the people safe. There are also some real pictures of astronauts in the shuttle and stuff in the middle of the book. I will put up a couple so you can see them. I felt that added to the reading experience quite a bit. This was excellent narrative nonfiction. I was gripped. I loved reading it. I read it so much faster than I normally read nonfiction because I just did not want to put it down. Even though I knew the outcome, I wanted to see everything that led up to it, and how this awful decision was made. If you're at all interested in learning about the Challenger explosion, I highly recommend this book. Reading the Challenger nonfiction book really kind of changed my whole opinion on manned space flight. I'm a huge proponent of sci-fi, and I love uh, hearing about humans exploring space, but realistically, it's quite expensive and not the best use for our resources. There are so many people on Earth that could use those resources here. And yeah, while I'm not completely against space exploration, I I think the book convinced me that I don't think we should be putting people out there just yet. The fact that I decided I didn't have an opinion on spaceflight beforehand, but I definitely feel like it is just too risky right now. And yeah, that's awesome when a book can totally change your opinion of something. So, this pairing was much better than the first one. I liked both of the books and would recommend them, albeit with some limitations with the fiction book. I have lots of topics that I intend to discuss in future episodes, but if you have any topics that you're super interested in, let me know down in the comments below, and I will look to try and find some books that would cover that topic. If you'd like to talk about either of these books or the series in general, definitely leave me a comment down below. Thank you so much for joining me. Happy reading!